Ethan Thorne drove through a world made of white fury. Snow, thick and wet, did not fall so much as it attacked the windshield of his vehicle, a dark, powerful beast of engineering that felt small against the storm's immense power. The wipers fought a losing battle, sweeping away one sheet of blinding white, only to have another immediately plastered against the glass. The road ahead was a suggestion, a memory of asphalt buried under a rapidly deepening shroud. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles pale against the warm leather. It was a familiar tension, this feeling of pushing through an obstacle with sheer force of will. It was how he ran his company, how he managed his life, how he had survived the last 3 years. His mind was a landscape just as desolate as the one outside. It was a place of carefully managed schedules, board meetings, and the hollow echo of a house that was too large for 2 people. His daughter Lily was the single point of warmth in that cold expanse, the one duty that still felt like a purpose rather than a task. He was heading home to her now, pushing through the blizzard because he had promised. He always kept his promises to Lily. It was a rule, a foundational block in the precarious structure of their life together. His phone had buzzed an hour ago with a text from Mrs. Gable, the kindly, silver-haired woman who looked after Lily. "She's waiting up for you. Says Barnaby can't sleep until you're home." A faint, sad smile touched Ethan's lips. Barnaby was a stuffed bear, worn from years of love, with one ear slightly askew and a patch on his fuzzy belly. He was a gift from Amelia, a relic from a life that felt like it belonged to another man. In the back seat, an identical brand-new bear sat in a crisp paper bag from a toy store. He had bought it weeks ago, thinking he could replace the worn-out original, but he could never bring himself to make the switch. The old bear was too tangled up in memory. It was another unfinished task in a life full of them. His life was a series of motions, a well-rehearsed performance of a man who was present but not truly there. He provided, he protected, he functioned, he did not live. The headlights carved a tunnel through the swirling chaos, illuminating the frantic dance of snowflakes. The world beyond this tunnel did not exist. There was only the growl of the engine, the rhythmic slap of the wipers, and the oppressive silence inside the cabin. It was a silence he had grown accustomed to, a silence that had once been filled with laughter and off-key singing to the radio. Now it was just a void. He had learned to fill it with thoughts of work, acquisitions, market projections, personnel reports. It was easier than filling it with memories. Then he saw it, a flicker of something at the edge of his vision, a dark shape against the suffocating white. It was wrong. Nothing should have been out here. The road was closed to all but emergency vehicles, a fact he had arrogantly ignored, trusting the power of his expensive machine to see him through. He slowed the vehicle, its massive tires crunching on the accumulating snow. The shape resolved itself into a figure hunched over, sheltering 2 smaller forms. A person, people, out here, in this. His heart, a slow and steady drum of duty, gave a sudden, sharp jolt. It was an instinct he hadn't felt in years, a primal surge of alarm that cut through the gray fog of his daily existence. He pulled the vehicle to the shoulder of the invisible road, the engine a low growl in the storm's scream. He flicked on the external spotlights, and the scene was thrown into stark, unforgiving relief. It was a woman, her coat thin and dark, soaked through and clinging to her frame. She was on her knees in the snow, her arms wrapped around 2 small children who were pressed against her, their faces buried in her jacket. They were a tiny, desperate island in an ocean of frozen hostility. For a moment he was paralyzed. The image was so stark, so utterly hopeless, that it felt unreal, like a scene from a bleak film. He saw the woman's shoulders shaking, not just from the cold, but from sobs he could not hear over the wind. He saw the way one of the children, a small boy, looked up, his face pale and streaked with tears in the harsh light. The sight broke through the ice of his carefully constructed composure. This was not a problem to be analyzed or a deal to be closed. This was a crisis demanding immediate, unequivocal action. He threw the vehicle into park and pushed open the heavy door. The wind hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath and driving icy needles into his exposed skin. He pulled the collar of his expensive wool coat tighter around his neck and strode toward them, each step a deep plunge into the snow. The sound of his approach made the woman flinch. She looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and utter exhaustion. Her face was pale, almost translucent, her lips tinged with blue. "Are you all right?" The words were absurd, torn away by the wind as soon as he spoke them. Of course she was not all right. She was freezing to death with her children on the side of a deserted mountain road in a blizzard. She tried to speak, but only a dry, rattling sound came from her throat. She shook her head, a gesture of profound despair. She pulled her children closer, a mother's instinct to protect, even from a potential rescuer. Ethan softened his approach, crouching down so he was closer to her level, trying to appear less threatening. "I can help you," he said, his voice louder, firmer, but calm. "My car is warm. I can take you somewhere safe." He looked at the children. The boy was staring at him with wide, vacant eyes. The other, a little girl, was completely hidden, burrowed against her mother's chest. "Please, you can't stay out here." The woman, whose name he would learn was Clara, looked from his face to the warm, glowing sanctuary of his vehicle. He could see the internal battle in her eyes, the instinct to distrust a stranger against the overwhelming need for survival. Her maternal desperation won. She gave a slow, jerky nod, a movement that seemed to take all of her remaining energy. "Okay," she whispered, her voice a fragile, hoarse thread of sound. Ethan moved without hesitation. He gently took the little boy, who was surprisingly light, and lifted him into his arms. The child was limp, his cold cheek pressing against Ethan's coat. He carried him to the car and opened the rear door. The warm air billowed out like a promise. He settled the boy onto the heated leather seat, then quickly unbuckled his own coat and wrapped it around the child's small, shivering body. He turned back for the others. The woman was trying to stand, one hand pushing against the deep snow, the other holding her daughter. She swayed, her legs unsteady. Ethan reached her in 2 long strides, scooping the little girl into one arm and wrapping the other securely around the woman's waist, supporting her. "I've got you," he said. The words felt foreign in his mouth, but they were true. As he helped her toward the car, a single thin piece of gray thread from the cuff of her worn coat snagged on the metal clasp of his watch. It was a small, insignificant detail in the midst of the chaos, but he noticed it. A fragile connection spun between his world of insulated luxury and her world of raw survival, tethering them together in the heart of the storm. He guided her into the back seat, next to her son, and settled her daughter into her lap. Then he shut the door, sealing them inside, away from the roaring wind. He returned to the driver's seat, the cold clinging to his shirt. He turned the heat up to its maximum setting, the vents pouring blessed warmth into the cabin. In the rearview mirror, he saw the woman fumbling to chafe her children's hands, her own fingers stiff and clumsy. He watched as the little boy's shivering slowly began to subside, his head lolling against the plush headrest. The woman murmured to her daughter, soft, reassuring sounds that were barely audible over the engine. Ethan reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a spare pair of woolen gloves and a thick scarf he kept for emergencies. He passed them back without a word. She took them with a look of dazed gratitude, her eyes meeting his in the mirror for a brief second. They were the color of faded denim, shadowed with a weariness that seemed bone deep. He saw not just fear, but a profound and shattering exhaustion, the look of someone who had been fighting a war for a very long time and had just run out of ammunition. He put the car in drive, the powerful engine easily pulling them from the snowbank. He drove slowly, carefully, his focus absolute. The destination was not a question. He could not take them to a hospital in this weather. The nearest one was over an hour away in good conditions. He could not take them to a hotel. They had no belongings, no resources. There was only one option. He was taking them home, to his home, to the quiet, empty sanctuary he had built to keep the world out. And now he was bringing the world in. The fragile gray thread was still caught on his watch, a silent testament to the moment his carefully controlled life had been irrevocably altered. The drive to his estate was a slow, tense crawl. The world outside remained a maelstrom of white, but inside the vehicle a fragile peace began to settle. The oppressive silence was replaced by the soft hum of the heater and the quiet, exhausted breathing of his passengers. Ethan glanced in the rearview mirror periodically. The woman, Clara, had wrapped his scarf around her little girl's head and was gently rubbing warmth back into the boy's cheeks. She worked with a quiet, focused efficiency, her movements economical and sure despite her obvious depletion. He recognized it as a professional calm, the kind he saw in his top executives during a crisis. His house was set far back from the main road, down a long, winding private lane that was heated from below, a luxury that seemed almost obscene in this moment. As they passed through the tall iron gates, the trees, heavy with snow, formed a protective canopy, and the wind's howl softened to a whisper. The house appeared through the swirling flakes, a vision of warm, golden light. It was a structure of modern glass, warm cedar, and dark stone, designed to blend into the mountain landscape. To him, it was a fortress of solitude. Tonight, it would have to be a haven. He pulled the car into the heated garage and killed the engine. The sudden silence was profound. "We're here," he said softly. "You're safe now." Clara looked out at the clean, organized space, then back at him, her expression unreadable. She nodded, a single, tired acknowledgement. The little boy was stirring, his eyes fluttering open. The girl remained asleep in her mother's arms, a small, still bundle. Ethan got out and opened the rear door for them. The warmth of the garage was a welcome embrace after the biting cold. He led them through a side door into a spacious mudroom, the air inside smelling of leather and wood smoke. He helped Clara remove her children's damp, thin jackets, then her own. Underneath, their clothes were just as inadequate, worn sweaters and thin pants. His jaw tightened. He pointed to a heated stone bench. "Please sit, I'll be right back." He moved through his own home with the swift purpose of a man reacquainting himself with forgotten duties. He went to Lily's wing of the house first. His daughter was fast asleep, her small chest rising and falling rhythmically, her beloved bear, Barnaby, tucked under her arm. Mrs. Gable was dozing in an armchair in the corner, a book fallen into her lap. Ethan touched her shoulder gently. She started, her eyes blinking open. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice thick with sleep. "You're home. Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine, Eleanor," he said, his voice low. "Go on home. I'll see you in the morning. Be careful on the roads." He didn't offer an explanation. He didn't need to. Her job was to care for Lily, and he was home now. She gathered her things with a few worried glances but asked no questions, a testament to her years of discreet service. Next, he went to the master suite, to his wing. He walked into the vast, silent closet, a space that was half empty. Amelia's side remained untouched, a museum of a life interrupted. The scent of her perfume, faint and floral, still clung to the air. For a moment, grief, sharp and sudden, pierced through him. He pushed it down. This was not about him. He pulled out a soft cashmere sweater, a pair of thick wool socks, and fleece-lined sweatpants. They would be too big for the woman, but they would be warm and dry. He grabbed a thick, plush robe from the back of the door. From Lily's closet he gathered pajamas, a small robe, and 2 pairs of fuzzy slippers. He carried the armful of soft fabrics back to the mudroom. Clara was sitting exactly where he had left her, her children huddled close. The little boy was awake now, watching Ethan with wide, solemn eyes. Ethan placed the clothes on the bench beside her. "These should be warmer," he said. "The guest bathroom is just through that door. There are fresh towels. Please take a warm shower, all of you." Clara looked at the pile of luxurious soft clothing, her fingers tracing the edge of the cashmere sweater. Her eyes filled with tears, a slow, silent overflow of emotion, too immense to be contained. It wasn't just gratitude. It was the overwhelming shock of simple, human kindness after a long, brutal season of indifference. She had been invisible for so long, a problem for people to look away from. To be seen, to be cared for, was a disorienting and painful relief. "Thank you," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time he saw past the exhaustion to the person beneath. He saw a flicker of strength, a core of resilience that the storm had not managed to extinguish. While they were in the bathroom, Ethan went to the kitchen. He worked on autopilot, his hands remembering motions from a long-ago life. He heated milk on the stove, adding a touch of honey and vanilla. He pulled a loaf of bread from the pantry and made 3 simple sandwiches with cheese and turkey. He found a bag of apple slices he had bought for Lily. It was a simple meal, a meal of comfort and substance. The domesticity of the act felt strange, a role he had not played in years. He was the provider, the one who wrote the checks that made food appear. He was not the one who prepared it. When Clara and her children emerged from the bathroom, they were transformed. Swaddled in the oversized but warm clothes with their faces scrubbed clean and their hair damp, they looked less like refugees from a storm and more like a family. The children, whose names he learned were Leo and Mia, were shy, peering at him from behind their mother's legs. The warm air and soft clothes were beginning to work their magic, chasing the last of the chill from their small bodies. He led them to the small breakfast nook that overlooked the snow-covered garden. He set the plates of food and mugs of warm milk on the table. The children stared at the food with an intensity that made Ethan's chest ache. Leo, the boy, reached for a sandwich with a trembling hand, then looked at his mother for permission. Clara nodded, her own eyes fixed on the simple meal as if it were a banquet. "Please," Ethan said gently, "eat." They ate in silence. It was not an awkward silence, but a reverent one. The children devoured their food with a quiet desperation. Clara ate slowly, methodically, as if forcing herself to take sustenance. Ethan sat with them, not eating, simply watching, a silent guardian at their table. He felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if he were watching a scene in someone else's life. His pristine, orderly home was now filled with the quiet sounds of strangers eating, of children sipping warm milk. It felt right. The house felt less empty. The silence was not a void, but a peaceful quiet. After they finished, Clara's shoulders, which had been hunched with tension, began to relax. A faint touch of color had returned to her cheeks. Leo's head was nodding, his eyelids heavy. Mia was already asleep, her head resting on her mother's shoulder. "I don't know how to thank you," Clara said, her voice low and steady now. "You saved us. My car, it ran out of gas miles back. The battery died. My phone was dead. We started walking. I thought we could make it to the next town." It was a foolish hope, born of desperation, and they both knew it. "You don't need to thank me," Ethan replied. His voice was gruff, uncomfortable with the weight of her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. Clara looked at him, her gaze clear and direct. "No," she said softly. "They wouldn't have. I know that." He had no answer to that. He stood and led them to the guest wing, a part of the house that was rarely used. He had prepared 2 rooms, turning down the beds, placing a glass of water on each nightstand. The rooms were warm and inviting, with soft lighting and thick duvets. He showed Clara where everything was, then paused at the door. "My name is Ethan," he said, realizing they had not even exchanged names. "I'm Clara, and this is Leo and Mia." She looked around the beautiful, safe room at her children who were already succumbing to the pull of sleep and warmth. "You've given us a sanctuary, Ethan." He simply nodded and pulled the door almost closed, leaving it cracked just enough for a sliver of light from the hallway to spill in. He walked back to the great room, the heart of his home, and stood before the massive stone fireplace. He stared into the dying embers, the small glowing coals, a stark contrast to the raging blizzard outside. He felt the fragile gray thread on his watch, a tiny, persistent reminder of the family now sleeping under his roof. The storm had breached his walls, not with wind and snow, but with a quiet, desperate need that he had, to his own surprise, been able to meet. And in doing so, he felt a flicker of something unfamiliar in the cold emptiness of his heart. It felt like warmth. Later that night, long after the house had settled into a deep and peaceful quiet, Ethan found he could not sleep. The silence was different now. It was not the hollow silence of absence, but the full silence of presence, of other lives breathing under his roof. He walked through the darkened hallways, a ghost in his own home, and found himself standing in the great room, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the storm, which had not relented. The world was still a whirlwind of white. A soft sound from behind made him turn. Clara was standing in the archway, wrapped in the plush robe he had given her. She was holding 2 mugs, steam rising from them in gentle wisps. She looked hesitant, as if unsure of her right to be there. "I couldn't sleep either," she said softly. "I made some tea." "I hope that's all right." "Of course," he said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. He gestured to the large leather armchair near the fireplace. "Please." She walked over and handed him a mug. Their fingers brushed, a brief, warm contact. She sat in the opposite chair, curling her feet up beneath her. They sat in silence for a few moments, sipping the warm tea, watching the fire he had just rekindled crackle and spit, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The setting was intimate, a pocket of calm carved out of the heart of the storm. It was a space that invited confession. "The children?" he asked. "Fast asleep," she said, a small, grateful smile touching her lips. "I don't think they've been that warm or felt that safe in a very long time." Her gaze drifted to the fire. "I keep waiting to wake up, to find us back in the car." Ethan didn't know what to say. The usual platitudes felt cheap and insulting in the face of what she had endured. So he remained silent, simply offering his presence. It seemed to be what she needed. "My husband, David, he passed away a 1.5 years ago," she began, her voice quiet but clear, as if she had decided this man, this stranger, deserved the truth. "It was a long illness. It took everything, our savings, our house, everything. I'm a nurse, but with his appointments, and then, after trying to manage the children alone, I lost my job. We've been staying with friends, in shelters, but you can only do that for so long. We were on our way to a new city, a new state. I was told there was a job, a place to live, a new start." She took a shaky breath, her knuckles white around her mug. It was all we had left, that hope. She looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I failed them. Tonight I truly failed them." "You didn't fail them," Ethan said, the words coming out with a surprising firmness. "You were trying to save them. You did everything you could." He knew about doing everything you could and still having it not be enough. He knew that feeling intimately. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. She wiped it away impatiently. "And you?" she asked softly, shifting the focus away from her own pain. "You live in this beautiful, enormous house, but you seem as alone as I am." It was a bold observation, but it was true. She saw the emptiness in him because she was so familiar with it in herself. Ethan stared into the flames. He hadn't spoken of Amelia, not really, to anyone. He had given clinical, factual accounts. He had accepted condolences with stoic grace. He had never once spoken of the gaping wound she had left behind. But here, in the dead of night, with this woman whose own loss was so raw and present, the words began to form. "My wife Amelia died 3 years ago," he said, his voice rough with disuse. "It was an accident, a car accident, on a night just like this." He paused, the memory of physical weight in his chest. "She was driving home. The roads were icy. A truck skidded. It was instant. They told me it was instant." He recited the facts as he always did, a shield against the emotion. "I was at a conference overseas. I got the call, and my world just ended. 1 minute I had everything. A wife I adored, a beautiful baby girl. And the next, it was all just gone. Shattered." He looked up from the fire, his gaze distant, lost in the past. "For a long time, I felt like I was underwater. Everyone was talking, moving around me, but it was all muffled, distant. The only thing that was real was Lily, my daughter. I had to keep going for her, so I just functioned. I went to work, I came home, I made sure she was fed and clothed and safe. But I wasn't really here." He looked at Clara, and he saw a flicker of profound understanding in her eyes. She recognized the landscape of his grief. She had walked its barren plains herself. "Underwater," she whispered, nodding slowly. "Yes, that's exactly what it feels like." In that moment, they were not a wealthy CEO and a destitute woman. They were not a rescuer and a victim. They were 2 survivors, 2 single parents, 2 people who had loved and lost and were still trying to figure out how to navigate the wreckage. The shared acknowledgement of their trauma forged a bond between them that was stronger than gratitude, more profound than circumstance. It was a bond of mutual recognition. They talked for hours. They spoke of their spouses not as tragic figures, but as the vibrant, loving people they had been. Clara spoke of David's terrible jokes and his talent for gardening. Ethan spoke of Amelia's infectious laugh and her passion for painting. They shared stories of their children, the small moments of joy and frustration that made up a parent's life. They were filling the empty spaces in each other's stories, building a bridge of words across the chasm of their individual griefs. As the first hint of dawn began to lighten the sky, casting the snow-covered world in a soft blue glow, a comfortable silence fell between them. The storm outside was finally beginning to subside. "I should get some sleep," Clara said, though she made no move to leave. "Yes," Ethan agreed. Just then, a small noise came from the hallway. Lily stood there, rubbing her eyes, her beloved bear Barnaby clutched in her hand. She was looking not at her father, but at Clara. "Daddy?" she said, her voice small and sleepy. "Who's that?" Ethan's heart seized for a moment. He had not prepared for this. "Lily, honey, this is Clara. She and her children needed a safe place to stay because of the storm." Lily padded into the room, her eyes fixed on Clara with a child's unfiltered curiosity. She walked right up to Clara's chair and held up her bear. "Barnaby has a tear," she announced, as if this were the most important fact in the world. She pointed to a small rip in the bear's arm, where some of the stuffing was peeking out. "Mommy used to fix him." The mention of Amelia hung in the air. Ethan felt a familiar pang of helplessness. He could buy 100 new bears, but he couldn't fix this one. He couldn't mend the small tears, literal or figurative, that appeared in his daughter's life. Clara looked from the bear to Lily's earnest face. She gave the little girl a soft, gentle smile. "I'm very good at fixing tears," she said quietly. Later that morning, after a shared breakfast that felt surprisingly normal, Ethan went to his home office to make some calls, rearranging his world to accommodate the storm and its aftermath. When he returned to the great room, he found a scene that stopped him in his tracks. Lily, Leo, and Mia were sitting on the floor together, building a lopsided tower out of brightly colored blocks. Lily, who was often quiet and reserved around new people, was laughing, a bright, clear sound that filled the room. She was showing Leo how to place a block, her small hand guiding his. Clara was sitting on the hearth, a small sewing kit he hadn't known he owned open beside her. In her hands was Barnaby, the bear. With small, neat stitches, she was carefully closing the tear in its arm. Her hands were steady and sure, her focus absolute. She was not just mending a toy, she was performing an act of care, a quiet ritual of healing that resonated deep within the silent walls of his house. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, watching, unseen. He saw his daughter, happy and engaged in a way he hadn't seen in months. He saw this woman, a stranger, effortlessly weaving herself into the fabric of their lives, mending the small, broken things with a quiet grace he could only admire. He felt a sense of rightness, a feeling that this was how this house was supposed to feel, alive, full, hopeful. Lily looked up and saw him standing there. She beamed, a radiant, unguarded smile. "Look, Daddy, Clara is fixing Barnaby. She's making him all better." Then she handed Clara a piece of paper. It was a child's drawing rendered in bold crayon. It depicted a large, sturdy house with a warm, yellow light glowing in the windows. Inside were 5 stick figures, a tall one he recognized as himself, a small one with a ponytail that was clearly Lily, and 3 others, a woman with 2 smaller figures by her side. Above the house, a bright sun was shining, while in the corner of the page, gray scribbles represented the storm, kept safely at bay outside the circle of their home. It was a child's simple, profound interpretation of the last 12 hours. It was a picture of a family, of their family, and it was the most beautiful thing Ethan had ever seen. The storm raged for 2 more days, a relentless siege of wind and snow that cut them off from the rest of the world. The roads were impassable, the power lines down in the valley, but inside Ethan's house on the mountain, a different kind of world was taking shape. The forced proximity, which could have been awkward and tense, instead became a crucible for connection. The large, sterile house began to feel like a home. Clara, unwilling to be a passive guest, quietly and efficiently began to fill the spaces he had long since abandoned. She discovered the well-stocked pantry and cooked simple, hearty meals that filled the kitchen with the forgotten aromas of baked bread and simmering soup. She organized the children's play area, unearthed board games from dusty closets, and initiated art projects at the large kitchen table. She moved with a quiet confidence, never overstepping but instinctively knowing what was needed. She was bringing the house back to life, one small act of care at a time. Ethan found himself in the unfamiliar role of observer. He watched as his daughter Lily blossomed under the attention. She had a new audience for her stories, new playmates for her games. He watched her with Leo and Mia, saw the easy, immediate way they formed a unit. They shared toys without argument, helped each other build block towers, and curled up together on the sofa to look at picture books. There was no awkwardness, no hesitation. Children, he realized, understood the concept of a tribe far more instinctively than adults. They simply accepted this new reality and found their place within it. One afternoon he came upon the 3 of them in the living room, engaged in a game of their own invention. It involved rolling a small ball across the floor and hiding behind furniture. The room was filled with the sound of their giggles, a sound that had been absent from the house for 3 long years. Lily's laughter in particular was a balm to his soul. It was a pure, unburdened sound, and he realized with a jolt how much he had missed it, how he had forgotten its specific music. He saw her not as the small, fragile person he needed to protect from the world, but as a happy, resilient child, capable of immense joy, and that joy was being unlocked by the presence of these strangers. He found his own role shifting as well. He was no longer just Lily's solemn protector. He was part of their small, temporary community. He read stories to all 3 children before their naps, his deep voice a calming rumble. He helped Leo build an intricate castle out of magnetic tiles, feeling a forgotten sense of playfulness return. He found himself smiling, a genuine, unforced smile, as he watched Mia, the youngest, determinedly try to put a puzzle piece in the wrong spot. These were small, insignificant moments, yet they felt momentous. They were threads of normalcy and warmth being woven into the cold, gray tapestry of his life. The centerpiece of this quiet transformation was the mending of the bear. After Clara had finished her repair, the stitches on Barnaby's arm were so neat and fine they were almost invisible. The bear was whole again. Lily had been ecstatic, hugging the bear tightly, and then, in a spontaneous burst of affection, hugging Clara's legs. Later that day, Leo had approached Clara with his own casualty of play, a small wooden truck that had lost a wheel. He held it up to her with the same unquestioning faith Lily had shown. "Can you fix this too?" he asked. Clara examined the truck with a serious expression. "I think I can," she said. Lily, who had been watching, piped up with a child's profound and simple logic. "Clara can fix everything," she declared with absolute certainty. The words hung in the air, landing with a gentle weight in Ethan's heart. He knew she was just a child talking about toys, but the statement felt larger, more symbolic. He looked at Clara, who was now carefully applying a drop of wood glue to the truck's axle. He saw her not just as a survivor, but as a healer. She possessed a quiet, powerful ability to mend what was broken, to soothe what was hurting, to create order and comfort out of chaos. It was in her hands, in her calm presence, in her gentle voice. She was nurturing life back into the forgotten corners of his home and his heart. On the 3rd day, the snow finally stopped. The world outside was transformed, buried under a thick, pristine blanket of white. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the sun, reflecting off the snow, was dazzling. The immediate crisis was over. The roads would soon be cleared. The world would intrude once more. The thought filled Ethan with a strange and unwelcome sense of anxiety. The sanctuary they had built was temporary. Reality was waiting. Clara seemed to feel it too. A quiet tension settled over the house. The easy rhythm they had fallen into was disrupted by the knowledge that it had an end point. She began to subtly withdraw, tidying things with a little more finality, speaking of the future, of getting to that new city, of finding that job. She was preparing for departure, steeling herself to return to the harsh uncertainty of her life. That afternoon, while the children were napping, she collapsed. Ethan found her in the kitchen, a heap on the floor by the counter. For a terrifying second, his blood ran cold, the world narrowing to a single point of panic. It was a visceral, sickening echo of the phone call that had shattered his life 3 years ago. The sudden, brutal intrusion of tragedy. His mind flashed with images of hospital rooms, of cold finality, of a life extinguished too soon. He rushed to her side, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt for a pulse. It was there, thready but present. Her skin was hot to the touch, her breathing shallow. She was burning with fever. The years of stress, the malnutrition, the exposure to the cold, and the subsequent emotional release had all conspired to bring her body to a breaking point. The resilient nurturer was now utterly vulnerable. In that moment, a profound and terrifying fear seized him. It was the fear of loss, a monster he had kept locked away for 3 years, and it was now roaring back to life. He had let his guard down. He had allowed this woman, this family, to breach his defenses. He had allowed himself to feel something akin to hope, and now the universe was threatening to snatch it away, just as it had before. He acted with cold precision, the only way he knew how to combat panic. He scooped her up, she was alarmingly light, and carried her to the guest room. He covered her with blankets, placed a cool cloth on her forehead, and tried to get her to sip some water. He was functioning, performing the necessary tasks, but inside, a wall of ice was rapidly forming around his heart. It was a defense mechanism, a retreat to the emotional fortress where nothing could hurt him. For the next 2 days, he became the sole caregiver. He looked after the 3 children who were quiet and worried, their playful energy subdued by their mother's illness. He cooked their meals, read them stories, and answered their anxious questions with a detached calm. He tended to Clara, checking her temperature, changing the cloths on her forehead, sitting by her bed for long stretches, watching her sleep. He did it all with a meticulous efficiency, but the warmth was gone. He was polite, he was correct, but he was distant. He had withdrawn to a safe emotional distance, a place where he could not be touched by the potential for more pain. Clara, in her feverish state, was only vaguely aware of his presence. She drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of a cool hand, a quiet voice, a steady presence. But when the fever finally broke on the second night, and her mind cleared, she felt the change in him immediately. He was there, bringing her a bowl of broth, but he wasn't. His eyes didn't quite meet hers. His voice was flat, devoid of the warmth she had come to recognize. The easy connection they had forged in the firelight felt like a distant memory. He had rescued her once from the storm, and now he was rescuing her again, but this time it felt like a duty, not an act of human connection. The silence in the house returned, but it was a new kind. It was a heavy, tense silence filled with unspoken fears and the palpable distance Ethan had erected between them. The children felt it too, treading softly, their voices hushed. The beautiful temporary home they had created had begun to feel like a gilded cage. Clara, though still weak, knew she had to break the silence. She had to understand what had broken between them. That evening, after the children were asleep, she found him in the great room, standing before the window, staring out at the moonlit, snow-covered landscape. His posture was rigid, his shoulders tight with tension. He was a sentinel guarding a fortress she was no longer allowed to enter. She walked softly into the room, her bare feet silent on the thick rug. "Ethan," she said, her voice gentle but firm. He turned, his face a mask of polite neutrality. "Clara, you should be in bed. You're still weak." "I'm stronger than you think," she said, taking a step closer. "What happened?" "While I was sick, something changed. You've changed." He looked away, back out the window. "I don't know what you mean. I've been taking care of things." "You've been performing a function," she countered softly. "You haven't been here, not really. You're a million miles away. You're afraid." Her words hit their mark. He flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of his jaw. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" she pressed, refusing to let him retreat. She knew this territory. She had navigated the emotional minefields of countless patients and their families. She recognized fear when she saw it. "When you found me on the floor, what did you feel, Ethan?" He remained silent, his profile a stark silhouette against the window. "You were terrified," she answered for him, her voice full of a deep, aching empathy. "You were terrified that you were going to lose someone again, that you had let yourself care, even a little, and that you were going to be punished for it, just like before. He finally turned to face her, and his mask of control crumbled. In his eyes she saw the raw, unvarnished grief and fear he had kept suppressed for so long. It was the look of a man drowning. "I can't," he whispered, his voice cracking, the sound of something breaking deep inside him. "I can't do it again, Clara. I can't go through that again." And then the dam broke. The great, powerful Ethan Thorne, the man who commanded boardrooms and braved blizzards, crumpled. He sank into the nearest armchair and buried his face in his hands, and his body was racked with the silent, agonizing sobs of a man who had not allowed himself to truly grieve. It was 3 years of pain, of loneliness, of hollow functionality, all pouring out in one devastating, cathartic release. Clara did not rush to him. She stood still, giving his grief the space and respect it deserved. She let him cry, let the poison of his suppressed sorrow finally drain away. When the terrible sobs subsided into ragged, exhausted breaths, she moved to his side. She didn't hug him or touch him. She simply knelt before his chair so they were at eye level. She waited until he lifted his head, his face streaked with tears, his eyes red and raw. He looked broken and vulnerable and more human than she had ever seen him. "You're right," he said, his voice a hoarse rasp. "I was terrified. Seeing you lying there, it felt like the world was ending all over again. And my first thought, my first instinct, was to close myself off, to build the walls higher so that nothing, no one, could ever hurt me like that again." "That's a safe way to live," Clara said, her voice a soft, reassuring anchor in his storm. "But it's not living, is it? It's just surviving. We've both been doing it for a long time." He looked at her, at the quiet strength in her eyes, the profound empathy in her expression. She was not pitying him. She was understanding him. "What you went through was horrible," she continued, her voice unwavering. "What I went through was horrible. We can't change that. And loving someone, caring for someone, it is a risk. It's the biggest risk there is. There are no guarantees, but you can't let the fear of a possible ending stop you from having a beautiful beginning, or a beautiful middle." She finally reached out and gently placed her hand on his, which were clenched into tight fists on his knees. Her touch was warm, steady. "You don't have to be a fortress, Ethan. Love isn't about building walls to keep pain out. It's about knowing that if the storm comes, you won't have to face it alone." He stared at her hand on his, then up into her eyes. In her gaze, he did not see weakness or need. He saw a strength that mirrored his own, a resilience that had been tested by fire and had not been consumed. He saw a partner. He saw a future he had not dared to even imagine. The fear was still there, a faint tremor in the deep parts of his soul, but it was no longer a monster. It was just a scar, a part of his story, and for the first time he felt it might be possible to write a new chapter. He slowly unclenched his fist and turned his hand over, his fingers lacing with hers. It was a simple gesture, but it was a promise, a recommitment, a choice. He was choosing to be present. He was choosing to risk his heart again. He was choosing to let the light in, even if it meant that someday darkness might follow, because the light, he was beginning to realize, was worth it. The warmth was worth the risk of the cold. In the weeks that followed, the house on the mountain became a permanent home. The pretense of a temporary sanctuary was dropped without discussion. It simply ceased to be relevant. Clara and her children stayed. The move to a new city, the promise of a distant job, all faded into the background, replaced by the solid, grounding reality of their new life. It was a life built not on a grand declaration, but on a series of small, quiet choices made every day. A new rhythm established itself. a gentle domestic cadence that felt both novel and deeply natural. Mornings were a soft chaos of breakfast, of finding lost shoes and packing lunchboxes. Ethan, who once started his day in silence with coffee and the financial news, now found himself mediating disputes over who got the last cartoon-themed yogurt and listening to Lily's detailed plans for her day at school. He started driving all three children to the local school, his luxury vehicle now filled with booster seats, stray crayons, and the sound of childish chatter. Clara, with her nursing credentials and quiet competence, quickly found a part-time position at the town's medical clinic. It gave her a sense of purpose and independence that was important to her, but her true work was in the home. She was the heart of their burgeoning family, the calm center around which they all orbited. She created routines, planned family meals, and filled the house with a sense of order and warmth that went far beyond mere tidiness. She made it feel lived in, loved, and safe. Ethan watched this transformation with a sense of quiet awe. He saw the profound effect Clara's presence had on Lily. His daughter was thriving, shedding the last vestiges of the quiet, solemn child she had become after her mother's death. She was bright, outgoing, and secure in the knowledge that she was surrounded by love. He saw how Leo and Mia, once haunted by uncertainty, were now relaxed and happy, secure in their new home, their new school, and their new life. They called him Ethan, not Dad, but they looked at him with an affection and trust that filled a hollow space in him he hadn't known was still so empty. He and Clara were building their own quiet rhythm. They were not swept up in a whirlwind romance. Their connection was deeper, quieter, forged in shared trauma and mutual respect. It was built in the small moments, in the shared glances across the dinner table as the children recounted their days, in the comfortable silence as they cleaned the kitchen together after the kids were in bed, in the way she would place a cup of tea on his desk when he was working late, without a word. Theirs was a love story written in gestures of care, not in grand pronouncements. One Saturday afternoon in early spring, as the last of the snow melted to reveal the first green shoots of new life, Ethan knew it was a time. The uncertainty of their arrangement, the unspoken question of "what are we?" needed a permanent answer. He wanted to solidify what they had all built together. He wanted to make their chosen family official. He did not plan a grand romantic gesture. That wasn't their story. Their story was about family, about safety, about building a home. So he decided the proposal had to reflect that. He decided the children had to be a part of it. He took Lily aside that morning. He sat with her in her playroom, surrounded by her dolls and her art supplies. He held a small velvet box in his hand. "Lily," he began, his heart beating a little faster than usual. "You know how much I love you, right?" She nodded seriously, her eyes wide. "And I love you, Daddy. And you love Clara and Leo and Mia." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "They're my family." The simple, honest declaration made his throat tighten. "They are," he agreed, "and I love Clara very much. I want to ask her to be my wife. I want us all to be a family forever, officially. What do you think about that?" Lily's face broke into a wide, radiant smile. It was the answer he needed. "You should give her a ring," she said, pointing to the box in his hand. He opened it. Inside was a simple, elegant ring with a single, clear diamond. It was not ostentatious. It was quiet, beautiful, and timeless, just like what he felt for Clara. "I need your help, though," he said, leaning in conspiratorially, "and Leo's and Mia's help, too. This is a family decision." The plan was simple. That afternoon, they were all working in the garden together, planting flowers in the beds that had been neglected for years. It was a perfect spring day, the air warm and smelling of damp earth and new beginnings. Clara was showing Leo how to place a pansy in the soil, her hands covered in dirt, a smudge on her cheek, and a look of pure contentment on her face. Ethan thought she had never looked more beautiful. At the prearranged signal, a slight nod from Ethan, Lily, Leo, and Mia sprang into action. They approached Clara, a small, determined delegation. Lily was in the lead, her expression one of grave importance. In her hands, she held not the velvet box, but a small box she had built herself out of Lego bricks. It was clunky and multicolored, a perfect vessel for their new blended life. "Clara," Lily said formally, holding out the box, "we have something to ask you." Clara looked up, bewildered, wiping her hands on her jeans. "What is it, sweetie?" Leo spoke next. "We want you to stay with us forever." And then Mia, the youngest, added the final, crucial piece, "and be our mom, too." Lily opened the Lego box. Inside, nestled on a piece of tissue paper, was the diamond ring, sparkling in the afternoon sun. Clara stared at the ring, then at the three earnest, hopeful faces looking up at her, her eyes filled with tears. She looked over at Ethan, who was now standing beside her, his own eyes shining with emotion. "Our life started in a storm," he said, his voice quiet but steady, meant for her alone. "And you brought the sunshine. You healed this house. You healed my daughter, and you healed me. We're already a family in all the ways that matter. I just want to make it official. Clara, will you marry me? Will you let us be your home forever?" She didn't answer with words. She couldn't. She simply nodded, tears streaming down her face, a radiant, watery smile spreading across her lips. She knelt in the dirt and wrapped her arms around all three children, pulling them into a tight, fierce hug. Over their heads, her eyes met Ethan's. He knelt too, joining the embrace, completing the circle. They were a messy, tearful, dirt-smudged heap of love and happiness in the middle of a half-planted garden, and it was the most perfect moment of his life. Their wedding was not a grand affair. It was held a few months later on a warm summer evening in the backyard of the house that had become their home. The setting was the same garden they had knelt in for the proposal, now bursting with vibrant, colorful life, a testament to the care and love that had been poured into it. There were no crowds, no elaborate decorations. The only guests were Mrs. Gable, a few close friends who had become family, and the children, who were the ceremony's heart and soul. Clara wore a simple cream-colored dress, her hair woven with small wildflowers the children had picked that morning. Ethan wore a light-colored suit, no tie, looking more relaxed and happy than anyone had ever seen him. They stood under a large oak tree, its branches stretching out like protective arms as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over everything. They wrote their own vows, words that were simple, direct, and deeply personal. Ethan spoke first, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "Clara," he began, his eyes locked on hers, "the night I met you, I was a man living in a fortress of my own making, going through the motions of a life I didn't recognize. You and your children came into my life like a storm, but you didn't break my walls down. You showed me how to open the door. You taught me that a home isn't made of stone and glass, but of warmth, laughter, and care. You mended the broken pieces of my life, and you showed me how to live again, how to love again. My vow to you is simple. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be the safe harbor for you that you have been for me. I love you." When it was Clara's turn, she took both of his hands in hers. Her voice was a soft, steady murmur, filled with a quiet strength that was her signature. "Ethan, the night I met you, I was out of hope. I was lost in a storm, not just of snow, but of despair. I thought my only job was to survive. You didn't just save me from the cold. You offered me a sanctuary where I could learn to live again. You showed me a kindness I thought no longer existed in the world. You gave my children a home and a future. You saw me not as a victim, but as a person, You trusted me with your home, with your child, and then with your heart. My vow to you is to always be your partner, to face every storm with you, side by side. I choose you. I choose this life. I choose our family. I love you." But the most poignant moment came from the children. Instead of a traditional ring exchange, they had decided the children would present the rings. Lily carried Ethan's ring on a small embroidered pillow. Leo carried Clara's. As they stepped forward, Lily spoke, her clear voice carrying in the quiet evening air. "We promise," she said, looking between Ethan and Clara, "to always help each other, to share our toys, and to be the best family." It was a vow of their own, a simple, profound mission statement for their new life together. After they exchanged rings and were pronounced husband and wife, there was no wild applause, just the happy tears of their small audience and the tight, all-encompassing hug of their new, complete family of 5. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, exhausted from the excitement of the day, Ethan and Clara sat together on the back patio. They were on the same bench where she had once tended to the garden, a place that now held so much meaning. The sky was a deep indigo filled with a brilliant spray of stars. The air was cool and fragrant with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. They sat in a comfortable silence for a long time, his arm around her, her head resting on his shoulder. It was the same spot where their journey had truly begun, not in the fury of the storm, but in the quiet work of nurturing something new. "It's funny," Clara said softly, her voice a murmur in the dark. "If my car hadn't run out of gas, if you hadn't been driving on that closed road, if the storm hadn't been so terrible, none of this would have happened." Ethan tightened his arm around her. "I used to believe that my life was derailed by a single, random, tragic event," he said, thinking of Amelia. "I thought my story was over, but it wasn't. That was just the end of a chapter. You were the start of a new one." He looked at her, her face illuminated by the soft light from the house. "We didn't save each other, Clara," he said, the realization settling in his soul with a profound sense of peace. "I didn't rescue you, and you didn't fix me. We made each other whole. We chose to build this. It wasn't chance or fate. It was a choice. Every day, it's a choice." She lifted her head and kissed him, a soft, lingering kiss filled with the quiet certainty of their shared future. Their family was not born of perfection. It was born of wreckage. It was built from broken pieces, mended with patience, and fortified by a love that was brave enough to risk everything for a second chance. They were a testament to the belief that the most beautiful gardens can grow in the most unexpected places, nurtured into life after the harshest of storms. And under the vast, starry sky, their new life was just beginning.